Thanks for being with us on Good Morning Hawaii. Right now, as we continue our focus, our attention on relief efforts on Maui, we look to our leadership for actionable next steps. Among those efforting recovery efforts at the federal level, Congressman Ed Case joining us right here on Good Morning Hawaii. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, aloha.
A big announcement yesterday about just reopening the island.
I mean, absolutely. You know, we're, of course, one month and 1 day from a terrible, tragic disaster. Still a lot of tragedy, still a lot of grieving out there. But the necessity to really muster the efforts of the federal, state, and local governments, our communities, to go through a very, very systematic approach that deals with the families that are affected, definitely the businesses that are affected, but try to get life back to a normal pace. Very, very difficult to do in this situation, of course, but we have to do that. We have to make sure that Maui is stable economically, that kids are getting back to schools, that businesses are able to recover, that families that have been so affected have the best possible resources that they can in terms of immediate disaster assistance. Housing is a huge areas where we're still all focusing together, and my job is to make sure the federal government is part of that.
It seems like this should be good news for everyone. The realist in me tells me it's not good news for everyone. What are you hearing as far as maybe reasons why maybe this is too soon, or any other detraction as to what this target date is?
I mean, it's a tough one to get right? You want Lahaina to be able to grieve. You want the people of Lahaina to be able to just come back to their homes, to have closure. I mean, we still don't have many people identified. We still have too many missing. And so there's a lot of uncertainty out there still, but you've got to return to some semblance of normalcy to get the community back into a rhythm, and really that helps to stabilize situations so you can actually focus on the midterm, long-term recovery, which is where we are right now, and that's where the federal response is very, very critical right now.
One of the things early in maybe the first week after the fires that I felt was difficult, and I don't know if it's different than any other type of disaster, but just the messaging. It seemed to be very disjointed, and one agency would say something about coming to Maui, another would say something different. Your thoughts about where we are now as far as some of the coordinated response in messaging?
Well, far more coordinated, obviously, than in the days immediately after the incredible tragedy. And, you know, there was no warning. One day Lahaina was there, and the next day it wasn't. One day people had homes, they had families, they had ohana. Next day they didn't. So it was an incredible tragedy and incredibly sudden. And I think that's what we tend to looking back on it now, forget that in the days immediately following that, in a disaster of this magnitude, and that sudden, that unexpected, you're going to have a period when you need to pull things together. And I think that the federal government did a good job of pulling it together. We've been through this before. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, which responds to disasters, that's their business to know how to coordinate. I went yesterday to the FEMA Coordination Center here in Honolulu with all of our state and county government agencies and the private sector as well, and they're very well coordinated now, very good plan. So I think, you know, now we have to implement it, we have to fund it, and that's the critical part of my job, is to make sure it is implemented, is funded. That's why I'm going back to D.C. Come Monday night for the September session of Congress, which is going to be really, really critical for appropriations and funding.
There was a congressional delegation that came and toured the damaged area, and certainly you're literally and figuratively closer to that. Did you learn anything, though, in this most recent tour of the disaster area itself, or what were you able to at least convey to some of your congressional counterparts?
Well, it's been really, really key during this period for us to get as many of our federal government partners out to actually see and feel and witness what happened. Because there is absolutely nothing that replaces being on the ground in Lahaina and feeling what that community went through, the devastation, the absence of any real life, the utter, I can only say the word, devastation. And I don't think that, anybody can understand that until you've actually been on the site. You can see it on TV, you can read about it, you can think about it, but to feel it is a different story. And we need help in Congress, we being the state of Hawaii and our congressional delegation, 4 of us in Washington, D.C. out of 535. We need our colleagues to understand and to help us. And so our goal has been to get as many of our partners out as possible. We've had a couple of congressional delegations now. We've also had, of course, the president, and we've had members of his cabinet. We've got another cabinet member coming this coming week. And so the more that can come, the better to actually understand that. I believe that that's going to translate into unified support for our efforts in Washington, D.C.
What about FEMA funding? It's supposedly running low or almost out?
Well, that's the #1 goal that I've got and the congressional delegation has right now. We have to replenish what's called the Disaster Relief Fund, which is the mechanism through which FEMA funds almost all of what's going on. All of what you see going on right now is really FEMA funding. There's some other funding from other departments like the Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Agriculture. I could go down the list. There's many, many agencies and departments involved. But the target, the focus, the agency walking point on this is FEMA. And they are almost out of money in their disaster relief fund because we've had a lot of disasters, and this is a huge one. And so we have to replenish that fund, and that is absolute #1 priority for me in the next literally days and weeks because we're coming up on the end of the federal fiscal year. This is the time when we have to make sure that that fund is replenished.
There are a lot of lawsuits that are in the pipe right now, but Governor Green mentioned yesterday the possibility of a damages settlement fund that maybe could streamline some of the process for some of the people that are going to need, that lost everything. What do you know about that?
There have been similar disasters out there in the rest of the country. Probably the one that comes closest to this is the PG&E disaster in California wildfires, in which the utility and others were, basically accused of negligence that resulted in great tragedy and great disaster and great death. And that also saw a number of lawsuits that were brought in various ways, shapes, and forms, a number of claims that were eventually brought together in a coordinated way so that there could be a resolution that was fair all around. Now, that's a model to follow. It doesn't mean we have to follow that model, but there are many things that are going to require our attention with Lahaina for years to come. This is obviously a years-long effort. And so, but what I try to do is say to myself, okay, my job is the federal government. My job is Congress. My job is my appropriations committee, which is the federal funding committee. And so, I stay in very close contact with the governor, with the mayor, with my partners, obviously, in the congressional delegation, with my colleagues in Congress. They've got their job to do, and I've got my job. My job is to make sure that the federal government is bringing the full resources to bear on allowing Lahaina to recover across the board, and by the way, preventing further such disasters throughout the rest of the state, because this could have happened anywhere. And so that's definitely one of my other primary priorities right now is, okay, where else do we have this risk, and what do we do to make sure it doesn't happen there?
I had asked Governor Green yesterday, and it brought some chuckles. I was asking about the Maui Invitational, which would be, I think it's like 80 days out now. It's the basketball tournament that's 3 days before Thanksgiving. One hand, it's a basketball tournament. On the other hand, it's one of the most visible events that this state has. Your thoughts about that happening?
I think wherever we can get back to as normal a life as possible, the better. And the Maui Invitational is an iconic classic, known around the country and the world. It centers our attention on Maui. Maui needs help, not just Lahaina. Maui needs help right now, and the Maui Invitational being held, I think, would give that kind of visibility. We need to communicate out there that Maui is accessible, open. We need to take care of Lahaina, but we also need to take care of Maui. And so in that spirit, I think it fits the profile.
As far as the fiscal year, it seems like we're on that annual, we're coming up on a shutdown. What can you tell us about the budget right now, where we're sitting?
If we don't pass certain legislation by September 30th, the government has to start to shut down, because our federal fiscal year expires on September 30th, and we have not passed the funding necessary to continue into the next fiscal year. That is extremely unfortunate. I don't agree with the reasons why that happened at all, but that's the reality that we face right now. And so we've got a couple of techniques to handle that. The first is a supplemental budget that basically boosts up current funding for emergency purposes. And that's my #1 priority in the next few weeks. Make sure that that supplemental has enough money to handle everything that we need to do on Maui. Then what we need to do is, if we can't get everything passed by September 30th in what we call the normal course, or the regular order we call it, which is just, hey, we should have gotten all this done by September 30th. Then the option is what we call a continuing resolution, which does in fact keep the government open, does in fact continue spending while we get our job done. And that continuing resolution also has to have some very, very specific funding and some very, very specific provisions to allow this disaster relief to continue. So, getting into the weeds on my job, I've got, a supplemental to deal with and make sure it works for Hawaii, and a CR to deal with that works for Hawaii inside the next few weeks.
One last question. We're coming up on about a month before the defueling process takes place with Red Hill. What can you share about where we are with that?
We're in a good place on Red Hill right now. The Joint Task Force has come up to an October 16th commencement of the actual defueling, which is obviously what we all want. They have done it by going through a very deliberate mechanism and process to make sure it's safe to defuel. They had to, what they call, repack the pipes which were drained in other words, kind of fill them up with fuel and make sure that they can handle the fuel so that the fuel flows very, very smoothly come October 16th. But we're on track, so I'm definitely watching that along with Maui.
You've had a lot to watch. You had a lot on your plate, and so we're grateful that you were able to make time for us here on Good Morning Hawaii. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
Ed Case joining us here on Good Morning Hawaii. We'll have more when we come back.